Good morning, everyone. We'll just wait a couple more minutes.
Wednesday.
Mm. Georgia, do you remember exactly how many people we were expecting?
I believe the number was in the 30s for registered folks.
Great. We'll give it another minute. Welcome, everyone. Right. Well, we'll get started. This meeting will be recorded too, so folks that join late or need to hop off know that it will be recorded and posted on our website later on. My name is Marina Caceres. I serve NBRC as our Forest Economy and Timber for Transit Program Manager. Also have managed some of our partnership with USDA Rural Development. I know that you all are used to seeing my colleague Sarah Lang. She is out of the office, and so we are subbing in for her. Hopefully we can answer your questions, and if not, I'll write them down and we'll talk to Sarah and get back to you. I'm joined by a few colleagues here at the Northern Border Regional Commission. Our Executive Director, Sarah Waring, is online, Georgia Casamatis, Program Specialist, and Andrea Smith, our Program Director, and we also have Casey Haynes, our Program Coordinator. So a good group of us NBRC folks online. Today's session, I'll say that for today's session, as I said, it will be recorded and slides will be made available online. The session will cover NBRC's partnership with USDA Rural Development and administration of these projects funded through our partnership. Before we dive in, we want to give advance notice of the next LDD training session scheduled for August 28th from 9 to 11 a.m. So same time. This session will cover how to help a grantee and will include a peer-to-peer learning session. So how to help a grantee get to the partial notice to proceed, when to do a partial notice to proceed versus a full notice to proceed. Please take a moment to review this bulleted list of items here and consider what else you might want to learn about during the Quarter 4 training. And feel free to share ideas in the chat. We will relay those to Sarah. And then, of course, feel free to use the chat today to populate any questions as well. So feel free to send in any suggestions for the Quarter 4 training, but also questions during today's session, and we will work through those as we go. So the primary purpose, again, of today's training is to cover our partnership with USDA Rural Development. We'll start, and I'll hand it off to our Executive Director, Sarah Waring, in a moment to give a little bit of background and a history of the partnership, and then we'll move into our training session. In March, NBRC offered a training for all of you, our LDD partners, which covered in detail the grant lifecycle and processes for standard NBRC projects. And by standard NBRC projects, I mean like the Catalyst projects that you currently administer that you're used to, including many items on the bulleted list here. Projects funded through NBRC's partnership with USDA are awarded through the Catalyst Grant Program, and much of the project administration for these is the same, but there are places where the federal partnership demands some additional logistical and administrative components. So rest assured that today's session will not be a repeat of your March training, but instead we'll use our time today to walk through those various nuances as they relate to administration of projects funded through our partnership with USDA. Right, and with that, I'll hand it off to you, Sarah.
All right, good morning, everybody. It's nice to be here with you and to see some of the names that I recognize, and I look forward to meeting a lot of you over the course of hopefully years and years to come. You can tell that the slides are mine when they have a lot of like boxes and arrows, and they're not quite as well designed as everybody else's slides. So just bear with me here for a moment. But I wanted to start by giving a little bit of background and history about the relationship between USDA Rural Development and NBRC as an agency. And I'm actually really excited to share this with you because even though we treat our funds from USDA slightly differently than our core appropriated funds from Congress, we've actually done a massive amount of work behind the scenes over the last 2 years to reduce what it is that our grantees have to deal with when they're dealing with two agencies. The two primary reasons we have reduced the burden, the paperwork burden, is one, because we were running up against some regulatory restrictions within rural development's program regulations, and two, because NBRC finally now and has had the capacity for the last few years to do much of this work on its own. So remembering that NBRC is a young agency, especially in comparison to USDA RD, a lot of this couldn't happen 7 years ago, but now we are in a place where we can reduce the burden for grantees by having NBRC act as a stronger player in this linkage here. So first, I want to explain how the funding moves from Congress to USDA RD and then to NBRC and then to grantees. A couple of you may have heard me say this before, but I like talking about the 3 A's and an O, right? So Congress appropriates funds. In this case, they are actually appropriating funds to USDA Rural Development. It's usually about $8 million, and it gets split between a number of different regional commissions. That's Farm Bill funding. So we watch that funding when the Farm Bill comes around, if they ever, don't just extend it again for another year. The partnership with USDA RD began with the Appalachian Regional Commission, and then when NBRC came online, we worked really hard with our congressional partners to make sure our name was included in that Farm Bill funding. Now, for those of you who know how rural development is structured, right, they are structured really state by state. And in our region, the only exception is that Vermont and New Hampshire are combined into a single state. So the state office of Vermont and New Hampshire was chosen to administer all the grants that went to the entire NBRC territory, no matter what state they were in, including Maine and New York. And at that time, they chose to put the appropriated funds into the Rural Business Development Grant Program, the RBDG program. Again, you all are probably pretty familiar with this program. It has the widest mission area, the broadest set of activities. It can be a revolving loan fund, it can be equipment dollars, it can be technical assistance. It's really quite broad, but it is a 1-year program, right? So that was one of the tricky parts. In addition, grantees are reporting every quarter. There are a lot of different pieces of paperwork. There's a lot of different back and forth. And the NEPA and environmental process was also going back through rural development. So all of these arrows really indicate that like everything NBRC had to do with that money had to follow rural development's regs and protocols. So what that meant was we were essentially passing through all of that regulatory paperwork down to the grantees, collecting it on their behalf, sending it back. If rural development had a question, we then had to go back to the grantees and get the question answered to get it back to RD. And they then had, I mean, you get the idea, right? Like it took a while to process a lot of these. When I got to USDA Rural Development, I was state director for Vermont and New Hampshire. What we discovered was that NBRC's funding through the Rural Business Development Program was running up against their 3-year extension limit. So they have a limit for those rural business development funds. Now, our money is no year money, and we can grant extensions past our 3-year performance period, but their funding through RBDG is 1 year. So all of a sudden I had a whole bunch of NBRC grants across 4 states that were about to be deobligated, right? Because our rural development was like, these are done. We've extended them all the time we can. So we started a process that took us about 12 or 13 months to unpack the relationship where we had the money and shift it from being embedded in the Rural Business Development Program to simply being a grant from RD to NBRC. What that meant was we then also walked through a couple of other things. The first thing was NEPA, and we took over the ownership of managing the NEPA process without having to involve rural development unless it was an environmental review. So anything that we determine as a CADX, we could move along from NBRC. We have to include them when it's a bigger ground disturbing project with these funds. By the way, our states also know some of this, so our states are ideally choosing ones that fit the USDA sort of rules and regs for the USDA money as carefully as possible. Second, we've reduced the time that it takes for reimbursements because now we don't have to move every single grant reimbursement in quite the same way. We can reduce that paperwork time, and rural development knows and trusts that we are following our own reimbursement procedures. Third, we reduce some of the paperwork because they no longer have to do the rural business development grant application and grant review paperwork. And honestly, our team, Georgia in particular, takes on batching a lot of that and putting it into RD format and making sure that the paperwork fits for them. So we're actually assuming the responsibility of essentially being the grantee on behalf of those projects that are funded out of this pot of money. And then finally, they are treating their obligations to our ultimate grantees as an obligation to us. So the appropriation comes from Congress. USDA Rural Development then gets an apportionment from USDA as a whole. They allocate it into this partnership program. They obligate it to us. We then obligate it to the grantees. But because they are doing that obligation to us, we're reducing a lot of the time and labor and energy from this relationship. So USDA Rural Development's pretty happy about this, in part because their capacity is pretty low at this point. We are also pretty happy about this because it means that our grantees have less to do overall. And it still doesn't match exactly what the rest of our Catalyst funds look like in terms of paperwork. So the rest of the training today is about what is still in place that we have to do that makes the reporting and compliance for these funds a little bit different. So we wanted to start by sort of giving you that background, saying it's not as bad as it used to be, and we're really proud of the reduction and really the efficiencies that we've created. It took us over a year between our 2 agencies to get to this point, and ideally, this is the kind of relationship and efficiency that we as a regional commission can do more and more of, because we can be more and more flexible in terms of how we manage our programs. One final thing, and then if we have 30 seconds, I can take a question or two. I also wanted to let you know that as of right now, Congress has appropriated funds for this partnership for FY25. They have been apportioned to the agency, to rural development. They have not yet been allocated or obligated to us, NBRC, for this year. So all that means for us at this point in time is that this spring round, that where everybody applied in April, where the commission's making a decision in June, this spring round will not have USDA funding embedded in it. This is usually the time of year when we embed the USDA funds into Catalyst, but because of the sort of transition year between presidential administrations, we're just not quite there yet. So we anticipate that this will, we will get more new USDA funded projects in the future, but that this spring round we may miss out on these funds coming through. And with that, I'll take a question or two, and then I will turn it back over to you, Marina. Or not. All right. So even though it's still different, it's better than it was. That's my main message for the day.
Awesome. Thanks, Sarah. Again, feel free to post some questions in the chat too, and we can take them as we go. All right. So that's great background and context framing for the rest of today's training. As a little extra added background here, prior to the 2023 calendar year, NBRC did not require projects funded through our partnership to utilize LDD assistance. So this requirement began in 2023. So currently we have 11 active projects funded through the partnership utilizing LDD assistance. So you'll see those, I think 10 or 11 projects that are using LDD assistance and which LDDs are identified here. As we move through the rest of the presentation, we'll cover, again, those administrative nuances that exist for projects funded through the partnership, starting with award process and project selection. There's a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes when we're reviewing Catalyst proposals. We identify those projects that are a good fit for the partnership, as Sarah kind of alluded to. And get to the point of concurrence with USDA where NBRC can publicize award decisions. We've worked with our colleagues at USDA to improve this process year over year. In our first years of partnership funding, for example, we would submit projects to USDA for their consideration around late July or early August, and we weren't able to officially make awards through the partnership until probably after Thanksgiving. In recent years, our process to review projects with USDA and execute an interagency agreement has moved much more swiftly, up to just a matter of a few weeks. Of course, this year in our current funding environment, it's a little bit more difficult, and as Sarah mentioned, a little more difficult to anticipate timelines, and as Sarah mentioned, it likely won't be until the fall that we can announce funding through the partnership. Each year during Catalyst application review, in partnership with our state program managers, we identify projects that would be a good fit. We've found that workforce development and training projects, planning projects, and data analysis and research projects are most ideal for USDA funding. Selected projects are sent to partners at USDA for their review, and the proposed funding packet USDA receives from NBRC is complete with the project scope of work and budget information for each project as submitted in the Catalyst application. And then often when NBRC makes award announcements, projects selected for funding under the partnership are still under review by USDA. And so for that reason, when we send out award letters, we notify selected USDA projects that while their project has not been funded yet, it's been put forward for funding consideration through the partnership. Once NBRC and USDA concur on those selected projects, we are able to issue award letters officially for those projects funded through the partnership. In addition to NBRC's standard application requirements and project setup, project initiation requirements, grantees funded through USDA are asked to submit a few additional forms before the notice to proceed can be issued. Like Sarah said, this list used to be longer and somewhat duplicative of forms already collected by NBRC. Grantees are now asked to submit just 3 additional USDA required forms, including their AD 1048 certificate regarding debarment, suspension, ineligibility, and voluntary exclusion, the RD 400-1, the Equal Opportunity Agreement, and RD 400-4, their assurance agreement. And those forms are collected after awards are made and before NBRC issues a notice to proceed. All right, I'm going to hand it over to Andrea, if you'd like. I realize I'm happy to present this, but I can hand it over to you if you'd like to talk through NEPA. Otherwise, I'll keep moving. Under the initial years of partnership funding, all projects had to go through NEPA review by USDA Rural Development. That process could take months and delay a project's ability to begin spending. Now, as Sarah mentioned, we've been able to streamline the NEPA review process by conducting it in-house with NBRC's environmental consultant, the Clark Group. Only proposals that do not meet categorical exclusions and proposals that may have extraordinary circumstances, including requiring Section 106, require that further review by our partners at USDA. Earlier, I mentioned that we found projects ideal for USDA consideration include those workforce development, planning projects, and data and research projects. Part of the reason these projects are prioritized for partnership funding is because they're usually going to be CADXed and don't require that further USDA review. In those instances where further USDA review is required, NBRC works directly with our partners to review the projects and coordinate communications and requirements with the grantee. And in any case, once NEPA is complete, documentation is provided to our partners at USDA for their records.
Rena.
Yeah.
Wanted to point out Sarah's raising her hand.
Yes, thanks, Georgia. One thing that we discovered as we were going through this process is that the 2 agencies run the NEPA process at different times in the awards like timeline. So USDA Rural Development does not allow for a grant obligation, a grant award document to be signed off on until NEPA is complete, right? NBRC issues the obligation and the award agreement pending a successful NEPA process. So that was one of the other things that we sort of discovered was that one of the reasons our timelines were so different is that the NEPA process was plugged into the awards and obligation process at different moments. So we were also able to really straighten that out, which I think is going to make a big difference. Thanks, Maria.
Awesome, thank you. So as it relates to procurement, the only additional nuance for projects funded under a partnership with USDA is that USDA may ask for procurement documentation. So we just tell grantees to be certain to document their procurement procedures, really in line with any other project funded through NBRC. All right, and at this point, I'll pass the mic to Georgia, who will review our processes for progress reporting, financial reporting, and reimbursements, and highlight those places where the partnership presents nuances.
Good morning, everyone. I hope you're doing well. I think some of you remember me from the last presentation in March, and I just wanted to say hello again, and hopefully we don't repeat too much as you've sat through trainings again and again related to grant life cycle. So there's not too many differences for the USDA NBRC partnership requirements, reporting, and PPRs. NBRC does have needs to meet for USDA, which require timely submissions of reports. So I'd love to suggest strong partnerships with your grantees across all programs, making sure that you're periodically reaching out to them if you haven't heard from them in a while, making sure you're CC'd on emails, and training your grantees to get into the habit of utilizing you when you are budgeted in their grant to support them as administrative needs come up. The due dates are the same. That has been changed in the last couple of years, which has made our processes a little bit easier and streamlined. So they follow the same reporting due dates. Please try and get these reports in within the month. And NBRC then reports to USDA within 15 days after the end of that due month. So we always hope to get these reports no later than the 30th on those due months that I've included on the top of the slide. And you can go to the next slide. I've included a cute little kitten staring intently at the progress reports that we all look at. Just as a reminder to check these reports. I'm not going to go through the bullets here, but those are the big bullets that we include, that we check repeatedly over and over and over. If any of those boxes are incorrect, we send them right back. So please have your grantees submit your reports to you so you can check them for these specific spots. And that's that from that slide. The 425 is also a required report for all programs. It's due annually, and it's due on in October by the 30th of each reporting year. And the reports look the same for all programs. They need to be filled out and submitted to admin. And I neglected to reference that any project 2024 and beyond, there's only a couple of you that might apply to these out there in this presentation. But moving forward, as we award more USDA projects, some of you might be tagged in. So this is important to know that if you are a GMS funded project, 2024 and forward, you will need to be tagged as an LDD in the GMS. There's a toolkit linked here in the presentation to show you how to go about that. And there's lots of hopefully troubleshooting questions. And if you do have specific questions about the GMS and reporting, feel free to enter them into the chat, or there's a question slide coming up soon. So as far as the submissions of these reports, very similar to everything else we've done. The next slide is going to show, again, what we look for as specifics on the boxes that we check. They're very standardized forms, and they're going to always kind of look the same, except for a few certain boxes that change. And box 10 is the where the, I'm sorry, box 13, box 11, maybe that's not included on this slide, is the one where all the numbers are listed. Those are the ones that can change within reimbursement cycles. So just making sure you check these. And again, reaching out to your grantees periodically if you haven't heard from them in a while to make sure they know, please send us your reports. We want to check them for you before you send them to NBRC. You know, that's administration opportunities for you to interact with your grantee. That's a specific, awesome connection that you can make with your grantee. And I think that's all for that report. And then the reimbursement cycle is slightly different. As we heard from Sarah, we don't hold the money in our bank. We need to request it from USDA. So when a reimbursement submitted to NBRC, we do the traditional check. We are doing a desk review every time. There's a specific due date of the month where you're allowed to submit within. And if it's after that date, we save it for the following month. That's a huge difference for USDA. You are submitting via the GMS if you're 2024 and beyond. And there's some helpful links for grantees to use when they're submitting a reimbursement tracker to keep track of all of those invoices. And we have streamlined the process between NBRC and USDA so that they no longer have to do another check on our reimbursements. We do 2 checks here, and then we submit to USDA, and they process the request. The money comes to NBRC, and then we request it from our financial institution. So there's an extra step in there, creating more time involved in the process. Just something to just be aware of, the major difference. And that should be it for this slide. I think Maria's going to talk a little bit about the differences on the amendments.
Yeah, I'll start out here just by noting that prior to our work with USDA to make processes more efficient, every amendment, no matter how small, required prior approval by our partners at USDA. Now, only budget adjustments greater than 10% of the NBRC USDA partnership award and major scope changes require pre-approval by partners at USDA. Budget adjustments greater than 10% and those major scope changes, requests of that in that category require NBRC's review, and then we send that information to our partners at USDA RD to review as well. They should be submitted along the same process as all other amendments. So they'll submit that form along with their SF424 CBW as with any other amendment at NBRC. Again, we review first, and then we'll set a meeting usually with our partners at USDA to review the request. We have to wait until we see approval by our partners at USDA to officially execute and process the change. Major scope changes, such as considerable changes to a project's match commitments or significant changes to project deliverables, would also trigger that additional review by USDA RD. And I'll hand it back to you, Georgia, to talk about budget changes less than 10%.
Yes, yeah, you can go to the next slide. This is the amendment form for all grant projects up until 2024. After, you'll be using the GMS. And this is a form that now has been updated to mirror what our GMS keywords are, like key personal change, budget redirection, budget change. You'll still use this form if it's above or below the 10%. You'll submit it through admin. Make sure to complete the form. A lot of times grantees get caught up on that very first box, NBRC. Please complete it with the ID number. I see this all the time where it's just blank. It's just NBRC. Just please check that form. Make sure the whole grant ID number is in there. The entire grantee name, date. There's a second page to this document that has information that the grantee will include if it's a budget change. We hope this form is easier. It's always there's always an opportunity to make it better. So if you have any improvement suggestions, please let us know. But we did recently just update it, so just keep mind of that when amendments come up. So you can find that on our website. The GMS, again, you'll just have to be tagged as a LDD in for the grantee, and you can find information about that in the GMS toolkit for LDDs. And there's only a couple out there that this could apply to right now, so I won't spend too much time on that. All right. That was a lot. If anybody has any questions.
Yeah, a lot of information in a short period of time. So if folks have questions, feel free to come off mute and ask them. Otherwise, we're going to turn to Casey, our GMS guru, to have a little corner here and talk about any challenges that you're experiencing in the GMS. I hand it over to Casey.
Good morning, everybody. This is going to be a little bit of a more kind of free form Q&A session around any of the GMS items that you're experiencing. So I'll first open it up for any questions that folks might have about how the system works, how to get access to any of the grant records for folks that you're working with, as well as any other sort of general questions. We've got a link to our guidance document in this slide as well. So let me pull up my notes here, hearing no specific questions.
I see a hand raised.
Actually, yeah, I have a quick question. So if they haven't assigned you as the LDD in their pre-application and now they've been awarded, how do you get access to it after the award?
That
As the
is a great
LDD.
question. No, fantastic question. So if you the thing that anyone who is working with a grantee in the GMS will want to make sure is done ASAP is as soon as that grant agreement gets signed off on in the system, that is kind of your go point in terms of being able to access. So the way that you do that is that the grantee will need to log in to their account and navigate to them. As soon as that grant agreement is signed, the system generates some records, some reporting records in sort of a draft state. So they'll just need to go onto that progress report and request a review of that. And that is the mechanism by which you as the LDD get connected to that record and are then able to view it. And so there's a step-by-step guide for you to be able to share with the grantees you're working with. Specifically on that little download grantee guidance document here bubble. So
I'm clicking on it and it doesn't open anything.
well, we can
If you
drop
can
that
email
in
it
the
out
chat
later.
here. Yeah, absolutely.
So can I see only the things that they invite me to, or can I see all of the project documents?
You will be able to see as soon as they submit that first request.
Yep.
You will then be able to see information related to the award records. You'll be able to see files that have been uploaded to the award.
Okay.
So you'll be able to see quite a lot of information, but they will have to add you onto any individual reporting record that they would like your help on submitting, as well as any reimbursement. So that will be a pretty active, engaged process that they will have to undertake for each of those. There's some things that you can kind of do on the front end just to sort of help them get into a rhythm on making those requests and finalizing the submissions. So something like saying, hey, once every quarter, make sure that you, as the authorized official, are logging into the system. You are submitting any materials that we have ready to submit, and you are also at the same time requesting the LDD review on any upcoming items. So that can be progress reporting as well as reimbursements, or if there's an amendment that needs to happen.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. I want to say Greta. Nope. All right.
Sorry, yeah, I have a question. Um, I was invited to review a progress report. I reviewed it and submitted it back to the grantee. And I think that it's still saying that it has is submitted for LDD review and that review isn't complete. And so I'm assuming that it's just something on the grantee's end, that do they need to sort of move it to that next step as complete?
Yes, that's
Okay.
correct. They have to there's a button on their end that'll say like complete review or something like that. So
Okay.
they'll just press that button. They'll complete the review, and that's what then will allow them to finalize the submission. So uh, from your end, that might be a helpful cue if you see things in the system that are still showing as LDD or sent for
Right. I
LDD
need to coordinate
review.
back with them to make sure that they're getting in
Mm,
there and moving those things forward.
yeah.
The second was, is the performance measures something that's part of the progress report, or is that something that is like when do those get completed as part of the progress report? Is that something separate?
I
Because in the
believe.
GMS, like it's kind of in the same place. There's different tabs. There's like a cover
Mhm.
sheet, then there's performance, and then there's the sort of place where there's files, and one of those is the progress report to upload.
Yeah.
Um, and so, a lot of those performance measures aren't typically completed until end of project. And so just trying to understand whether they should be, whether anything should be entered or filled in like during the project, even if it's zero.
No, absolutely. Great question. So those performance measures, those are coming directly from what were set up during the original application.
Yep,
And
understood.
so,
Completely get what they are.
yep. And so those, I mean, those are optional. So if they are tracking during the course of their project life cycle, the progress toward meeting those, then that's great. Those can be filled out. Ultimately, those will get filled out at the end of the project during closeout, but they're optional there
Okay,
and great for us
great.
to
Okay,
know.
that answers my question.
Yeah.
I just wasn't
Okay.
sure if it was like one of those fields that you have to enter zero in order for it to sort of move forward.
Great.
Got it.
And keep great questions. Keep them coming. I'm gonna also try to make sure I put that direct link to that document I'm referencing on that step by step in there as well. Great. Thanks for that next slide here. So I'll work on this slide here first. So specifically, if Sarah has done a great job putting together resources that are distilled and most relevant to your work with folks. Um, the grant management toolkit document is meant to be robust without being overwhelming. Hopefully, it's a long document. There's a lot of step by steps in there, but particularly most useful for any of you working in there is just understanding that there's a first section that's really some general navigation of the system that is applicable across all of the activities that they do in there. So just taking some time to familiarize yourself with that first part of that grants management toolkit will be really helpful. And obviously making sure they have a copy of it and that they can reference it will be helpful for them as they are logging in and trying to navigate Thank you, Marina.
Sorry,
And
Casey, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
no. That's great. Super helpful for that link. Thank you. I guess the last piece that I'll just point out to you as it relates to this slide here is there's an EGMS ID you'll see on pretty much any page when you're working in the grant system. That highlighted box here, the CR-AD-my gosh. There are a lot of different ways that EGMS ID will potentially appear based on what kind of record you're working in. So it'll look different if you're working on an amendment request versus a payment request versus just looking at a grant, that sort of thing. So the most important version of that number is the grant number, and that one will have like a GT. That's kind of that number that we look to most easily reference across the grant life cycle. So if you see that number, that's a great one. That it'll be like for Catalyst projects, it'll be like GT dash CAT dash 00025 or something like that. That's really the only one of those numbers that is good to kind of keep track of somewhere internally for you. If you are asking for some specific grants system support from us, which please don't hesitate to reach out and email us if you're running into some roadblocks. That number that you see, and whatever that number is you see, is helpful for us in quickly troubleshooting what's going on. So that's my spiel on those IDs. And I could ramble all day long. I will endeavor not to do so. But feel free to, if you have any questions, keep dropping them in the chat or shoot us an email.
I will say I've seen some of our grantees upload documents to their grant record and also to their award record. So there's that GT ID that Casey mentioned, and then an AD ID that's their award. And that AD number can change each time a project amendment occurs. So there's multiple places where files can be uploaded, and I've seen folks say like, where did all my files go? They were on this record, and it's possible in those cases where they might be on their grant record or award record. So just adding that here is they're probably still there, and you might just need to check a couple of places.
Awesome.
Thanks, Casey.
Thank you, and I will turn it back over. Thanks, everyone.
That is all we've got for you all today. Again, if you have questions, feel free to reach out to us. As Andrea mentioned earlier in the chat, Sarah Lang is out for a few weeks. So if you have any burning questions, please email us at admin@nbrc.gov, and we will work to get back to you as soon as possible. Again, these slides and recording will be made available at the link I sent in the chat here. So if you missed any part of today's discussion, we will make them public for you all. Thank you so much for your time this morning. Happy to be letting you out a little early. A lot early. Thank you.